Hello, everyone. This is Farrell Vincent, coming to you guys with the, for lack of a better phrase, all-intensive guide to stats, and specifically gear. We're going to touch on artifacts a little bit, but really gear for Watcher of Realms. And the idea about this particular one is to really talk about my own lessons learned, so that I can hopefully help you to avoid the endless grind that will be grabbing gear and trying to make things work that are terrible and burning a bunch of gold that you then have to replace to then have to level up other gear that is slightly better than the last set of terrible stuff you had and ultimately slow your progress. And so it comes to an understanding. We need to know what the heck kind of stats roll on gear. And I'm not going piece by piece. I just want to say like in general. And the reason I want to do that is because I don't want to make this video like 4 hours long like it could be. Really, gear comes down to a couple of things. Weapons always roll with a flat attack main stat. And then they can roll with other various substats. If you've got a tank or a healer or a DPS, your priorities will shift. And depending on the content, you may need some stats like hit point bonus on a healer, which this particular item is used for, right? And so you start to piecemeal together different sets of gear as time goes on, and you're going to find that you're going to use a lot of those sets over and over again. And that's where you can come into this quick change button. Duly note, you do need to progress to a certain point in the game before this really unlocks. Also, why do you have that ring? Whatever, I will figure that out later. But you'll notice that you have the ability to save gear sets. Now, I haven't started doing this regularly yet on my account, and the main reason behind that is I am changing this constantly. But I do find that this gear section right here, and specifically doing this combination for sets, is actually a very efficient way of handling piece by piece what it is you want to do to gear up your overall character. And the main reason for that is the way the attributes will show on this profile over here is the total number, so that you don't have to then guess. You'll notice that there's a lot of guessing that you kind of have to do from the original screen, so you kind of have to math some stuff out for specific heroes, right? So great example would be I always like to pick on
my blades are always ready.
Wrath. There he is. Because Wrath has a base 15% crit chance. And so you want to hit about 85% crit, but then that number will still not show that you're at 100%. Like, it doesn't turn orange where it tells you, hey, don't go any further because you're max crit, until you hit 100 over here, which you'd then be at 115, and that's just a waste of statistics. If, of course, it didn't make sense to have that extra piece that puts you over. And you'll find that a lot. I have Hex in this particular set running at a 99% crit, not because, it is the most efficient, but because, these two items rolled low, and so I'm making up the difference on these other ones, and honestly, not hitting that exact 100 isn't a big deal, right? Being 1% off is not ideal, but it's not gonna break the bank, especially if the items are worth it. So being up over 300% crit with, again, 150 over here plus 150 over here, we'll show you from this screen because it is easier to see, but being up over 100 or 300% crit with, the 280 attack speed, this is a good build for Hex. And the attack value being at 15,000 is actually a very good baseline for most content. But my hit points are a bit low, so if I needed tankier content for Guild versus Guild or the new guild boss or something like that, I'd have to switch some pieces out because this set isn't really meant for keeping Hex alive, although he has some abilities of his own to do that. You kind of get to then piece things together. Now, if the developers, Moondawn, ever watch my video, I would love if we could ever negotiate getting an attack speed like a slash here that tells you the attack interval time. Because it would be really nice if I could just say, hey, this 280 attack equals blank attack interval. Because right now the only way for me to do that is to come over here, click on details, and I can scroll down here, or I can click on the overall stats tab, and then I can scroll down here. So, knowing this number is actually very important for a lot of heroes, because you really want to hit, for most heroes, if you can, 1.1 to 1.0 attack speed is actually very nice for most heroes. So this particular build is a little low on attack speed, but honestly, that's not as big of a deal for Marksman, and especially Hex, who has this massive windup. Silas is a great example of somebody who I do have down in like the 1.2s, right? And he has that plus 250. Just always pay attention to these numbers, though, because like Marksman, especially your base 2-second interval Marksman, don't need a ton of attack speed. Whereas somebody like Uridin,
The wicked shall fall to the void.
has this really beefy 3.5 base, gets a bigger benefit out of that plus 239 than Hex does, right? So you can see that like Hex got a 0.7 at 250 or 240 or whatever it was, and Uridin's getting a 1.4 benefit. So he's getting more for the stats that you're putting in. There are some exceptions, of course, to the attack speed rule and crit rules and all these other things, so pay attention to hero skills and abilities because that will change things. So for instance, Felicia has specialized attack speed. So it gives her a better benefit for that. You have heroes like Zealous, there you are, who doesn't benefit from attack speed. Right? So don't bother with attack speed on Zealous. There are other heroes that do that. So pay attention to the skills because it will save you some time and headache if you are not wanting to, waste stats. I think Osiren is the other one that doesn't benefit from attack speed at all. But he's also like the discount Zealous, so cheers. So, when you're thinking of gear, when you're thinking of builds, when you're thinking of how to set up different heroes, it depends on the content that you're in, but it also really comes down to a couple of rules. The higher their base attack speed, the more attack speed you want on them. Try to hit as close to 100% crit rate as possible. This is a terrible example of a good set of stats. I think this is a quick equip just for autos, so don't judge me. As a matter of fact, I'm 95% sure this is a quick equip for autos, but I digress. You'll get sets out there. Oh yeah, this is definitely a quick equip.
Of my blade.
When you plan out your sets, make sure you're planning them out based on who the hero is and what kind of content you're going to have them in, right? Hex and Silas are currently geared to the teeth because right now it is my least favorite anti-air arena because I have a terrible composition. Oh well. So, cheers. But they currently, the people who are in my arena have the best gear. And that's generally the case except for, right around like Guild versus Guild time. So tomorrow around this time, I'm going to be putting in my Guild versus Guild team their best gear, right? So any of those heroes are going to have the best gear, and then I'll have my arena team in my second best set, and so on. As well, as arena resets from event to event, I like to put gear on those kinds of heroes. And for the most part, if I'm ever just autoing for a day and I'm just doing like random content, right? Like, oh hey, we've got this, Gear Raid 3 is currently going on and I've already got my setup done. I just quick equip people. just so that I don't have to deal with it. I also don't know why background fight wasn't clicked, but you know what? We're here, and I'm not changing it.
Aim is true.
So you can see that like having that setup and having that ability to plan out which heroes go where and what kind of setups you wanted to do and things of that nature is just a huge benefit. And then don't think about it when you don't have to. Pro tip, you don't have to be like me where you're being like particular about making sure that you're always switching gear based on days and weeks and all that other stuff. Use the planning tool, especially as you get your gear set. So those are kind of my pro tips to everyone. And actually, I'm going to quit out of this because I just realized the most important thing to talk about.
Makes you remember the right moves.
What are your stat priorities? So this is a nebulous phrase that I'm going to give you because it's not always this way,
The wicked shall fall.
but it is certainly something to think about.
Let's see what the cards
So,
have in store.
without a doubt, the best,
Let's
Actually, this
see
music
what
seems
the
a little loud.
cards have in store.
without a doubt, the best stat in the game is going to be attack, right? And the reason why attack is the best stat in the game is because
The wicked shall fall.
all
to
of the attack
void.
values are subtracted prior to the rest of the calculation for damage. So it starts off with your hero's attack minus the enemy's physical defense or magic defense. Simple as that. This is where this gets complicated, though, because at that point, you would then think, hey, if I have 16,000 attack and they only have 6,000 defense, I'm going to deal 10,000 damage. That's not the case. That's not even close to the case. Because it seems to me, and I don't know this for sure, I'd love to see the exact damage calculation written out, that'd make my life easier, but it does seem to me that there are defense to damage thresholds, right? So for instance, I can have
The realm
Valderon
trembles at the
with
sight
like
of my
70,
blade.
they're like 30,000 attack, right? Making up a number, but I genuinely think I could hit 30,000 attack on Valderon. But it's not worth it to hit that number, right? I can run them in all attack bonus pieces, which I apparently did. Oh no, this is a quick equip. Whew. I could do that. But this total, like, even having 25,000 attack, there's very little, if any content in this game that requires you to have 25,000 attack minus, like, Guild Boss 2 in the second phase with a bunch of stacks of the buff, maybe. But you're going to want to, like, bypass that rather than trying to, like, overcome it with attack values. And really the way you're going to overcome those kinds of attack value deficits is with heroes like Dolores, who have inspiration. Because these guys are the ones that really help you to get past those like extra barriers beyond just the base. So you really want to make sure you have enough attack for the content that you're in.
The sight of my
And
blade.
this is where the word nebulous comes in for me. Because it's like, okay, well, how much is enough attack for the content you're in? And I've noticed that there's a little bit of like breakpoints, right? So I'm going to pick on gear raids because of the way they escalate, right? Gear raid 18 is at 473k. And I noticed that me being around 10,000 on all my heroes made this really easy. Gear raid 19 goes up to 614, right? And so you're thinking, oh, hey, that's another 200k, which is what, 20% more? And so if you think, okay, well, 10% of that increase, right? So if you think 400k base, having a 10k attack, having around 14,000 attack for gear raid, 119 would make sense, except it isn't that low. You really want to do about a 25% increase per 200k over that 400k threshold. If you can. right? So going from, here to here, you're looking at about another 12% on top of that. So you're looking at about 18,000 attack. And if you have that, it actually does make this fairly simple. That's partially how I was able to beat this, right? Was by having that attack threshold. And then the same thing here, right? It's only, 37k, but now I'm looking at over 20k attack on all my heroes, and that's a lot harder to do for multiple heroes. Now, again, inspiration can make up the difference, so please play around with that too, because you can use your inspiration buffs to bypass some of those thresholds. That's what those heroes are for. But once you get past that threshold, you really don't want to keep pushing infinitely higher. My recommendation, at least, hang on, let me back up. You don't want to push infinitely higher if it's going to lower your stats in other areas, right? So once you hit that base attack threshold, then you really want to try to get as close to 100% crit rate as possible, as close to a 1.5 ish, at least half of the attack interval reduced for a hero. That number changes based on which hero it is and what their base attack is, right? Uriden's going to be more than, Valderon, who has a 2.6 second base, right? So really trying to get that, that half range is pretty good. That usually hits around 300-ish, 350 attack speed for most heroes is adequate. Some heroes you want to go a little bit heavier on, some you don't. The only real example I have of that is actually Dahlia. It's actually better to go a little bit heavier on that just because of the way Cursed Blossom works, her talent. But from there, so again, you get your 100% attack, you get your attack speed and your attack interval specifically down to half, right? So around 1.5, 1.6 seconds for most heroes. And then the last thing that I absolutely think is a necessity is hitting around 300, preferably more, crit damage. And crit damage is the stat that I wanted to highlight as the best stat in the game. And the reason being is, you've met all this other criteria. All of the other stuff I mentioned is just criteria. But crit damage does scale infinitely. In fact, if you're hitting that base attack threshold and you have a 700% crit rate, you're going to hit harder than if you have 20,000 attack higher than you needed it. I wish I could explain why that is the best. I would only really chalk it up to how math works once you get to a positive integer, right? At that point, you get your multiplicative bonuses on top of that, and as soon as you start to multiply those, that's kind of why that happens, right? Again, back to that example of, you have 16,000 attack and they only have 6,000 defense. Now you're hitting for 10,000. If you have a 400% crit rate, now you're hitting for 40k. Or sorry, crit damage. You have 400%. That's, 4 times multiplier. You're hitting for 40k rather than 10k. And that really does add up faster than you're ever going to get more attack bonus. But wait, Vincent, you're talking in concepts. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to pick on this piece of gear. The base stat, right? If I went all attack bonus pieces, you're looking at a 66% increase to attack bonus. But if I were to use a crit damage piece, it is 72%. So it's 6% higher base on the base attack roll. So if you're hitting that minimum threshold, you get 6% more stats from this than you do the other. And so that's why making sure that you are putting in those crit damage pieces on your heroes is way more important once you hit your minimum. So that kind of gets me to different forms of content, right? For the most part in arenas, you really want to hit around 18,000 attack for the higher levels, right? So if I'm going up against somebody here in the 440s, I want everyone to have about 18,000. Going up against somebody in the 300s, 12 to 13 is okay. But I would prefer higher. 15 is even better, right? In fact, you guys want to watch me lose? Let's do this. So you can see like what 14,000 attack does against the 377k dude, right? Like it's not all that impressive, but it's at least hitting hard. And that's really what it boils down to, is the level of the fight is proportional to how much damage you need to be dealing. Gear set wise, I'm going to briefly touch on this, and I don't even need to pull the screen up. Without a doubt, you're going to figure out very quickly that there are some sets that are better than others. And for the most part, you're always going to try to use a premium set. What do I mean by a premium set? I mean any of the things that drop from like Gear Raid 119 plus. And the reason you're going to do that is because they have 10% higher base stat, which just adds up faster over time. I really don't like this placement. Anyways. So, what ends up happening is your heroes will gain more from those sets than they do from the other ones. And really the best sets to focus on are Soulbound Arcana, Infernal Roar, the Invigoration set, as well as the like some of the other ones are okay-ish, but those are the main like ones you really want to do. Wow, what the hell is happening? There. Cool, I'll win, I guess. That's like the cheesiest win I think I've ever gotten. But why did that get through? Anyways, I will figure that out later. So, I digress. Again, Infernal Roar, Soulbound Arcana, and Invigoration are the best sets for most heroes in the game. You're going to use Invigoration on your support-based heroes. That can be a DPS, so make sure you get DPS versions of Invigoration. That can be like healers, so like Elowen, right, is in an Invigoration set. This is very good because it gains 10% attack after deployment, which is great because you get all of your bonuses plus 10%, which, by the way, gets you over those attack thresholds I mentioned earlier. Cheers. Handy tip, you can come over here and you can click on this button to see all of the sets and what they do. It's pretty understandable what you're going to do where. I think like Hell's Lament's pretty bad. I haven't figured out too many uses for Tempered Will other than like it'd be really good once you like if you wanted to do Tank Codex really hardcore maybe, but there's a better set for that in my opinion. Infernal Roar is great for your basic attack heroes, which all heroes have decent basic attacks, but there are some that benefit from this even more because they boost their basic attacks with their ultimates. And actually a lot of heroes do this. So like Hex is a great example of somebody who does that. Silas even to a small degree does it. The only reason why Soulbound Arcana becomes immediately better is because once you get the 5 stacks, then it's 50% damage, which this is 40% damage, so it's just a math game. The nice thing about this is it's instantly 40%, and it's always 40%, so there's that. And, well, I just so happen to get more good Infernal Roar pieces than Soulbound Arcana, so that's why I use that a lot more than the other, because, well, I got more good pieces here than I did there. I'm still working on my Soulbound Arcanas. The morale set's actually not terrible for one person, but it's not the best. Again, everyone getting 4%, you're looking at 8 heroes. 8 times 4 is 32% across the board. Now, subtract probably 2, because you're most likely going to have 2 healers in most content, 2 to 3. yeah, it's all right. I also really like Ageless Wrath because, well, it's got crit damage, and again, based on my earlier explanation of what crit damage can do, this is an evergreen kind of growth. So 60% damage, in theory, is even better than, Soulbound Arcana. The only reason why I say in theory is just because, well, it takes a little bit to get 30 stacks, so that can be somewhat difficult. Don't sleep on the sets below, right? All of these ones do have uses, and I still use them. So don't be afraid to keep pieces that are super good in some of these sets long term, right? And you're going to notice that I have an overwhelming amount of certain sets that I need to clean up sometime, especially now that I'm looking at it from this screen. Good God. 8 cursed amulets. Anyways, we will figure that out later. At risk of talking about this for even longer, I'm going to leave this here. Really, the best thing that I can hearken, and honestly the biggest thing to know, is you want to hit your attack threshold, get a little bit above it, try to hit that 300% crit, have your attack interval, and get 100% crit for most heroes, and you're good. With healers, as much attack speed as you can, because you want to get as low as humanly possible. You want your healing effect to be anywhere between 100 to 200, but not in between. So you either want 100 healing effect or 200 healing effect. And anything above that is kind of major on diminishing returns. This 292% sounds great, but it really isn't because the attack is very low on this particular setup. I'm assuming this is a quick equip. But you kind of get the idea, right? You really want to get as much reduction of attack speed for healers, and the main reason behind that is because, with exception of like Dolores, who is her own example, honestly just attacking more tends to be better than attacking 4 more and having that bigger, chunkier heal. I still don't have a problem, even in this set, like Elowen would still full heal every hero in the game because she is that cracked out good. So, pro tip, you don't really need a ton of main stat on most healers. Tanks, the inverse is true of defense and hit points. So you want them to have enough hit points to survive the encounters and a high enough defense that they don't get one-shot. So what does that look like? Again, you're going to have to play with it. Unfortunately, I haven't done nearly as much testing on tanks, and maybe I need to do that in the future just so that I can do an update. Heck, I'll plan on updating this at some point and try to throw a little caption in somewhere or something, just to be like, oh yeah, future me realized this. But really and truthfully, anywhere between 7,000 to 8,000 defense is needed for most content for an actual meaty tanky boy. The best tanks to do those kinds of things with that aren't, supposed to be one shot or aren't supposed to resurrect, like Crodor is a great example because he scales off defense, so you can just build as much as you want and you're good to go. So make sure that you're gaining gear for defense, make sure that you're gaining gear for DPS, make sure that you're gaining gear for healers, but also make sure that you're gaining gear that is for DPS, but also has some hit points and defense on it, just so that you can have a few hybrid people for when you need more hit points. Again, Guild versus Guild is my favorite example of this. If you don't have high defense and hit points in Guild versus Guild, you're just going to lose everyone on your map, and it doesn't matter what your BP is. I kill so many people because they focus on offense stats, and then they immediately die to demons. So, that is a grossly understated view into the complicated stat myriad of triangle of chaos that is this game. You need a lot of stats on a lot of heroes. But really focus on those key roles, right? Focus on getting some tanky gear. Not a lot, a couple pieces, 1 or 2 sets, that is. So a couple sets, right? 3, 4, 5 down the road, even better. Get up to 6 or 7, perfect. That's all you ever need. With DPS, I would make sure you have at least 10 sets by the end of the game, and you really want attack bonus, flat attack. You really want crit damage, crit rate, attack speed, which, by the way, if you're the inquisitive or intuitive type, you're going to start counting how many stats I'm listing out, and you're going to realize you're already at the max, and you still need hit points and defense for some other sets down the road. So keep building up your gear. That's why you have the stash limit you do, right? There's a reason you have this many. There's a reason I have pieces like this. And the main reason for things like this is just in case I want to build somebody with a crit rate amulet because it makes sense to me and I have a bunch of them. Or like I have this one because it has crit rate and it has the defense bonus, but this one has the flat hit points, so that's really good for an epic. Stuff like that. You know, I have pieces like this because it has a little bit of flat defense and a little bit of defense bonus, although this is probably going to be one of the ones that gets 86'd down the road. I don't know why I have this. This is pretty terrible. You know, I have pieces up here even that, like,
Even blind, I
you know,
strike true.
are clearly obvious why I have them, right? It has most of the stats you want, and in fact, pretty much all the ones that can immediately roll on a weapon, right? So attack bonus, crit rate, attack speed, perfect. Defense bonuses, meh. I'd prefer hit points. This bad boy, great example of a really good set, right? It's got that flat attack, attack bonus, crit rate, and the reason why I like that is because it's on a Silas, and most single target marksmen have pretty low base attacks, and so having that flat attack really adds up when they already have low attack to begin with. So that is my dissertation on gear. Really think about it. Feel free to ask questions. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to help you with understanding it or trying to come up with better ideas. And don't be afraid to keep some of these pieces early on that roll pretty low if it makes sense to keep them for a while, right? Like something like this is amazing early game. So don't be afraid to have these pieces. But also realize at a certain point, you don't need to have, you know, gear that rolls like, oh, I know there's one. Oh, where'd it go? You don't need to have gear that rolls really bad all the time too, though. So like having something like, I don't know, that for me right now, like this is a completely worthless piece. It's never going to go on anyone. And the main reason behind that is like it doesn't roll with crit rate. So understanding where your account's at and making sure to not keep around the trash that is going to junk up your inventory does help. Run lean, but make sure you have enough sets that you can equip at least 10 folks with good DPS gear. And don't be afraid to put a tank in a DPS set here and there if you don't need a super tanky boy. So, as always, I appreciate you guys. If you made it this far, please consider leaving this video a like and subscribing to my channel. And as always, I will see you on the next one.